I think for starters, I always used to tell every student that I worked with that science is kind of this tool that they could wield to solve global problems. Science is their superpower. And I kind of stand by that every day, right? It's this idea of you see a problem in society and you don't have to wait around for someone to do it. And once we make that the norm, everyone will be willing to solve problems. Everyone has a potential to innovate, and everyone has a potential to come up with big ideas out there.
Our guest today on Undaunted is Gitanjali Rao. At 16, Gitanjali Rao is an American inventor, author, scientist, and engineer, and was recognized on Forbes 30 Under 30. Rao is named Time's top young innovator and was featured on the cover of Time and named their first Kid of the Year. Rao is most known for her invention of Tethys, an inexpensive, easy-to-use device, an app that measures and shows lead in water, which is also accessible for people everywhere. Rao was also awarded the Top Health Pillar Prize for developing a diagnostic tool called Epione for early diagnosis of prescription opioid addiction. She also created an app named Kindly that uses artificial intelligence that can detect cyberbullying at an early stage and is partnered with UNICEF to roll out the service globally. She's a 3-time TEDx speaker and was awarded the United States Environmental Protection Agency President's Environmental Youth Award. She's currently a member of Scouts, and the Boy Scouts America has recognized her as its STEM Scout of the Year in 2017. And if she hasn't reached high enough heights, she's also working on flying higher by getting her pilot's license. Rao is also the author of a book, Young Inventor's Guide to STEM, and conducts innovation workshops for students throughout the globe. Gitanjali Rao, welcome to Undaunted. It's so great to have you here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're the first kid, or on I guess it was Time magazine. Is that what it is? First kid.
Yeah.
So I've got. Does that come with like a kid airplane? Like I don't know, kid plane one or something like that? Or what are the benefits of being the first kid? Because if the president gets a plane, certainly you should be getting something as a first kid. You know.
Honestly, I think it's the recognition itself is like such a big, I guess it's very important to me, especially because as a kid, it's very easy to have your words kind of taken over and people not to take you seriously. So kind of having that platform for me to build on is almost enough of a recognition, which is like kind of sad to say that we're living in those times, but it's almost, it brings a lot of hope for a bunch of the other kids who I hope will also be Kid of the Year in future years. But no, I got to be featured on Time magazine, but then they also took me to like super cool places. So like I was at the Museum of Ice Cream. I filmed so many different shows for Nickelodeon and Time for Kid of the Year. And then I got to meet a lot of cool people across the way as well. So
you're so interesting to me because you started off as a musician. That's what you were doing at the early part of your life. And then you get introduced to science, and that kind of takes you in another direction. So you have this really beautiful synergy between artistry and also science, or the STEM fields. And girl, let me tell you something. You had me thinking about Albert Einstein and what I'm sure you know this quote where he says, "Our technology has outpaced our humanity. Hopefully at some point our humanity will catch up with our technology." Talk a little bit about where that comes from for you, that desire to use your skill set, your gifts, your practice, your discipline in service to humanity.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I could start this out, since I was 3 or 4 years old, I played the piano at hospitals and assisted livings, wherever I lived at that current point in time. And it was just like an awakening experience for me because I always used to say my passion was putting a smile on people's face. I didn't really know what the word passion meant, but I knew it was always putting a smile on people's face. I was always that kid who would bring other kids presents for my birthday. And so it was just having that drive behind me was a big, big driving factor of everything else that I did. But simultaneously, I was slowly starting to open up into the world of science. My uncle got me the science kit when I was 4 years old, and it was truly an eye-opening experience for me. And before I knew it, I was slowly combining the two, and I called it, and my new passion here was using science for kindness, or using science to put a smile on people's face. And that's really where my initial drive came from at the ripe old age of like 6 or 7 years old. Is I was coming up with experiments, doing experiments, designing experiments, coming up with ideas to help save people in the long run as well. And obviously, I couldn't have done it without my parents across my journey as well. And my parents they were always those parents that they were more of like a try everything, right? That I was involved in every sport known to man, every activity, every musical instrument. It was less of like a, hey, you have to do this, and more of a, okay, try this out. If you don't like it, you could quit the next day. That was the only rule, is I had to go to one practice, one lesson, one tryout, one something. And if I didn't like it, I could quit the next day. And through that, I was essentially able to carve my own path as to who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do in the future. And, it's not a surprise, as that quite literally changes every single day with the wide variety of things that I truly am passionate about. But at the end of the day, I know that whatever I'm doing, I want to be putting a smile on someone's face. And that's something that will never change, regardless if I'm 3 years old or 16 years old, or if I'm 80 and living alone in that house of bearded dragons, because those are my favorite animals.
I love it. I love it. I love it. You're so lucky, because so many young people don't have that, that environment where the parents encourage them to try everything and just to be open to experiences. That was beautiful.
What are the things you wish you would have had even maybe more of during your upbringing that would have made you feel even more supported?
I guess more support from outside of a house environment, right? When I went to school, it was immediately down to, okay, do your homework, do your classes. And it was like going through the motions almost. I remember I used to ask my teachers, hey, I have this idea. Would you be able to sit down and look at it with me and see if, like, even if it was my science teacher, it'd be more of like a sit down, go do your work type of thing. And it was less of, I guess, an open environment for me as a kid to kind of be able to explore and look at other things. It was more of a let's just do what we know is right? And everyone is still afraid of change. There's a little part of everyone that is afraid of change. And that really got, I guess, amplified in elementary school when I was looking at people around me and my ideas were being shut down and kind of my goals were being shut down, my dreams and my motivations. And then I think another one that I wish I had more support behind was recognizing that it's okay to ask for help. Right. So from there, kind of my confidence was so degraded that I focused on doing things by myself and looking at how can I make things better and how can I do everything by myself, right? And again, I was 10 or 11 years old building devices with these really complex ideas that I'd never heard of in my life. I was spending days and days reading books and taking online courses. And I would hit roadblocks, but I would refuse to ask for help because I was scared of getting the answer no again. And I wish someone earlier in my life had told me that the worst answer you were going to get is no, right? Because there's no one stopping you from continuing to try things or do things a new way. And I wasn't aware of that. And I was so scared of failure. I was so scared of getting that answer no again. I was so scared of being let down again that I guess once I finally learned to ask for help and once I finally learned to look towards the people who do support me, my confidence went through the roof. I guess what I would love to tell other kids, who are my age or who may not have that support within the family environment as well is, it's worth messing up when it doesn't matter versus when it does. And that truly is what failure is. And it's okay to take that step back and it's okay to ask other people for help and, look at how you can impact the community as a whole. And you don't have to solve the world's problems when you're 10 or 11 years old. You just kind of have to do something that makes you happy. And I wish I kind of learned that in an early age. And it's much easier said than done, but I think it took me a while to be able to kind of be content with the fact that you don't have to be what everyone else expects you to be and kind of learn to fit in my own shoes.
Girl, did you say a while? You need to quit. I can say maybe in the last 10 years, I learned that it's okay to ask for help. So, and you're talking about a while, you need to quit.
and that it's okay to fail.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a really wonderful artist called William Pope who actually did a powerful performance art piece in Lower Manhattan, where he first went to Flint, Michigan. He got some water out of the water basin there, the river. And then he came to Lower Manhattan and actually poured that water into the river in Manhattan. That performance and just all the news coverage surrounding that issue made me think of the disparities between communities, right? How communities who have access and have privilege don't have to worry about their water being, dirty or polluted, right?
Yeah.
And you developed this incredible, innovation to test for lead levels in water. What was really powerful to me was the fact that you were able to look at these communities, see that you were connected to this community, that it wasn't a community, it was maybe a community in terms of geography outside of yours, but you share the same planet. And you're able to see that connection and then use your skill set to address that issue and that need. How did that develop for you? And how are you going about really implementing that in your work?
I think a lot of people, that's one of the biggest questions I get asked is you live halfway across the country from Flint, Michigan, right? Like what stuck out to you that made you realize that, oh, this is what I want to solve? And I think this concept of global problems, that's probably the hardest question you could have asked because it's a question that I quite literally don't know how to answer, right? It's this idea of I've always grown up in this place that where I saw something that made me uncomfortable and that I wanted for it to change. I always took that first step because I think I was always taught, whether it was by my family or whether by the environment around me, that if you don't like the way something is, then change it, right? You can't wait around for someone else to solve a problem when you kind of have all the power in your hands at that moment as well. And I think it also was something that I recognized as these global problems that we're seeing out there, everyone has to do their small part, right? And I wanted to do my small part and kind of what I defined as a small part as well. And so I looked towards creating devices and taking a scientific approach at things. But other students look at creating posters and coming up with artistic pieces, just like you were talking about. It's almost been instinctive and intuitive for me to realize that these global problems are ones that are worth solving and ones that we should take simple steps towards solving every single day. And I think more importantly than that, our generation is growing up in a place where we're seeing problems that have never existed before, right? And so that's as simple as climate change or quite literally lead in drinking water, but also cyberbullying and bullying, just like we were talking about. With the increase of social media, we're seeing more of it. And so while we're living in these times, innovation hasn't necessarily become an option anymore. It's a necessity. And I think all of us do our small part. And so this is mine.
Could you tell us a little bit about Tethys? Like explain a little bit about how this device, I mean, not too technical, but just in a nutshell, how it works.
Yes. So this is a device that's able to detect for lead in drinking water faster and cheaper than current tools out there. And it's built on something called carbon nanotube sensor technology. So what that is a bunch of carbon atoms linked together, and some of them are replaced with chloride because chloride binds really nicely to lead. And it creates these speed bumps at the base of the nanotube. So when current gets flown through it, the slower and slower the current is, the more lead there is in the water. And so that resistance is correlated to the amount of lead. And so I'm measuring that using this mini Arduino processor, and I'm sending all the data to your phone on an app that I created as well, which has this really cool feature where you can also upload the status of your test, the date, the time, and the location. And it uploads into a heat map. So it's a completely crowdsourced platform where you can see locations with more lead levels and less lead levels accordingly. Tethys was a device that took me about 3.5 months to build, but it's something that I'm actually still working on prototyping every single day. So Tethys was this very basic concept that I had, right? I wanted to create something to, actually in the beginning, was to remove lead in water. It was to completely remove lead in water. I took a step back and realized that I wanted to focus on detection of lead in drinking water because the unknown of what's in your water was almost a bigger problem out there. And so from there, what I started to look at was how can we detect for lead in the most simplistic way out there? And I read an MIT article that said that there's this utilization of carbon nanotube sensor technology to detect for food poisoning and kind of these hazardous gases in the air that spoiled food might emit. And I wanted to repurpose this for the purposes of water and look at how we can use this nanotechnology to detect for lead in drinking water. So it was multiple different trials and over 40 different prototypes. This is the first time I'd ever learned to code, 3D print, and my first time I'd ever heard of nanotechnology in my entire life. I was 10 years old. And so I was building all these different concepts and all these different ideas. And at one point, I had this viable working solution. I was doing all my testing at Denver Water's water quality lab, which they let me into, and I was so thankful for that. And I had this very, very basic concept of an idea that I wanted to build and how I wanted to look. And I kept working every single day. I'd apply to competitions, and the money from that would go directly back into 3D printing fees if I did win anything. And I had this very, like organic design of what I wanted my device to look like. And one day it met that goal, and it started with a device that was this big and gone to something that was this small through lots and lots of iteration. And after that, I applied for a patent and I received it just as of a year ago. And I'm right now working on looking at mass producing the device and starting with field testing in places like Flint, Michigan. So yeah, every day is a new adventure with that device.
Oh my goodness. Now, this is just one of the devices that you have been working on. You're working on two other, I mean, probably a lot more, but there's two others notably that we know about that we want to explore with you too. Tell us a little bit about Epion. It's a device we know for the early diagnosis of prescription opioid addiction.
Yeah.
And it's using genetic engineering. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
So Epione is a device that's able to diagnose for prescription opioid addiction at an early stage. And it uses these combination of gene engineering and protein detection methods. And so essentially what Epione is able to do is it provides this really great way for a first ever clinical tool to diagnose for addiction, right? And so the way it works is you essentially take a blood sample in your body, and it's pre-prepared with specific antibodies and enzymes that are correlated to the blood sample. And from there, this essentially makes this blood sample turn a specific color. So it's a colorimetry based test. And so I guess the easiest way to explain it is the darker the color of orange that is, the more, I guess, more protein there is in your body from the specific gene that indicates for addictive behavior. And so the rest is completely computational. And so I created an algorithm that's able to cut it down to the region of interest and compare how dark the color is versus a set of other samples, which shows all the way from a safe status of addiction to a critical status of addiction. And it's able to give you this qualitative result saying, hey, here's your status of addiction at this point. And it gives you the nearest physician centers and recovery centers so you can take next steps from there.
Wow, that's amazing. Normally, I'd hear about these things and I'd be like, well, that's a very interesting idea, but would not even want to approach the technical aspect. But you're breaking it down so beautifully that it's so interesting. And it's also, your description is so visual as well. The whole idea of the speed bumps and then the changing of the color, it's so accessible. And quite oftentimes science, the STEM disciplines are considered by many to be inaccessible in terms of the language, the way that they're spoken, the way that they're shared. You're a young woman, you're a young lady, but there was a report about the absence of women in the STEM disciplines, right? And how many of the classrooms and places in some of the better universities in the country, how there was this real lack of representation of women in the STEM disciplines. Now, as an African American, I also know, a sense of alienation, feeling alienated and feeling kind of left out of certain spaces and not welcome in. And I can imagine that women were feeling the same way. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that, we talk about, but it's one of those instances that we don't necessarily do anything about. So if you look at me, I don't look like your typical person in STEM, right? We're seeing I'm South Asian, I'm a female, and I'm 16 years old, which basically breaks every stereotype that exists in the science world. And so I guess what I've learned is by hopefully doing everything that I'm doing, I'm a face of not only South Asians, but females and also Gen Z by itself to kind of show that there's not really a face to what STEM is. There's not a face to what science and technology is as a whole. And so this concept of women in STEM is one that I've kind of looked at for years, right? I wrote a paper about it in 8th grade, and I'm still writing papers about it. Whenever we have a passion project topic, this is always what I go to. And the biggest thing that I've learned from it is there's a couple of reasons behind it, but the biggest one being a sense of isolation when it comes to it is it's very easy to get left out just because, again, this concept of being afraid of this factor of change, but also going away from what we know is normal. It's stayed the same for years, right? And changing the way that works is kind of saying that humanities will always be girl subjects and anything that is scientifically related will always be something that only a boy is capable of doing is something that has stayed so consistent that we're almost afraid to kind of break that and realize that, hey, we don't have to stick with what we know is today's normal. But I think another thing is also media portrayal, right? Because so many girls around the world are seeing I guess, what society views or deems as a scientist, right? And anything that does represent a female as a scientist is this very cliche version of the way they act, the way they behave, which isn't necessarily what every female in science looks at. And I think kind of finding that inclusivity and that balance between being inclusive but not mocking is something that we also need to look at in the media as well. And then last but not least, there's a topic I could talk about all day, but the wage gap, right? It kind of degrades the confidence of women to recognize that they can do something with the same amount of ability but still get paid less for it. And it's more applicable in scientific fields because for years women haven't been in science fields, but when they're finally entering science fields, they're getting paid less for the same job that they're doing as a male. And so those are some of the bigger reasons that I'm seeing, and ways to mitigate that are actually, one, looking at role models and the introduction of role models in, I guess, a STEM setting. The second one is combining science with other fields, right? Is looking at arts and music and looking at the multidisciplinary cross between them, because science can't work alone. And there's a lot of jobs that even females don't know exist, right? And ones that more instinctively apply to a woman, and more instinctively appeal to women as compared to other jobs out there, just because of the way that we've been raised. And then I think last but not least is looking at ways in which we can mitigate like the wage gap, and so being transparent with wages in a workplace. And that's not something I can necessarily speak about because I've never like had a real job and I'm a senior in high school. But it's something that, I've seen my mom go through, and I've seen my aunt go through, and I've seen everyone go through, right? It's a problem that does exist in today's society. And I think from there, that brings in kind of the role that I play as a female in STEM. And so the way I like to kind of think of it, and when I approach girls, the biggest thing that I like to say is we might not be first in line, but at least we are in line, right? Because at the end of the day, in the next 20 to 30 years, there's no longer going to be the stereotype of South Asians in STEM or kids in STEM or girls in STEM. It's just going to be people in STEM. And that's when we'll finally fit that stereotype. So we need to take baby steps and we'll work towards it. But I think, we have been making progress, and that's the best part of this. Is everything is the way to measure everything. The way to measure positive growth in this world is just baby steps.
You talked about representation, but not mocking representation. Yeah. Can you just unpack that just a little bit more? Because I thought that was a really interesting point.
So, society is making more of an effort, which I applaud, on involving more girls in STEM fields as well. And so what that means is placing them in the media and saying, hey, here's our example of a girl in STEM, right? But it's almost painting this very cliche example of what a girl in STEM looks like, is that they only wear these specific clothes, they only act the specific ways, portraying them quite literally as a nerd, right? With these like super thick glasses and wearing like suspenders all day. And even if regardless of if it's a girl or a boy, we don't necessarily see any sort of deterioration from that. That's what we recognize as a girl in STEM, even girls in color in STEM, right? And so we have the stereotype of what a person in STEM looks like. We have a stereotype of what a male in STEM looks like. And now we have this really wrong stereotype of what a girl in STEM looks like just because of what society's been saying, right? And so, it kind of, that was something that personally hit me, right? When I was watching these TV shows that had, the first couple of TV shows that came out here, they were like, oh, we have a female main character and she really likes science. And I was always that kid who would end up watching them. And then I was like, do I have to dress that way? Do I have to look that way to kind of be able to be taken seriously in this sort of society, right? And so for a long time, I was so confused as to like, kind of fitting into my own skin of what a girl in STEM really is. And if I was a girl in STEM, right? Kind of even doubting that much. And so what I had to realize is that, I like my sense of style. I like the way I act. I like the way I kind of represent my ideas as well. And I think the media has an opportunity to kind of portray that and add more, I guess, realistic elements to what a girl looks like. And I've seen more and more shows come out every single day, and I've seen it would get more and more closer to that goal, and even meeting that goal as well. But it's something that we can continue to do. And I think even including more inclusivity in the world of science and technology as well, involving, the LGBTQ community, and seeing how everything kind of can be involved in the science and technology world. Because if we can, I guess, open up inclusivity to other areas as well, we can also do the same for science.
what is it, could you say specifically that even you faced or that you have heard so that people can understand concretely what does that look like when we are not bringing in women to the circle, when we're not using the asset of women and her qualities in our workforce?
Yeah, I'll actually tell you a story that it's from a really funny person. Who was it? Oh, it was Carly Kloss, like supermodel Carly Kloss. This is a story that she told me when I was doing an event with her a while ago. And what she told me was in the airbag industry, they when they were building airbags for cars, they had these mannequins that they would paint specific colors and they would test out these airbags and see how this color kind of spread out on these airbags, right? And so they did this for years and years, and they started implementing airbags in cars. And from there, they started seeing more casualties in females and children than males from the airbag itself and not the car crash. And so people were so confused for years and years and years. And they started bringing women into the field. And they realized that these mannequins were designed after a male's body and not a female's body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where everything went wrong, right? Is this fact that we succumbed to like societal ideals such a long time ago that we weren't even able to see something so obvious and recognize how messed up that was. And so by involving females in the circle and bringing them to the table, it not only maximizes innovation and creativity from a different perspective, but it also brings in this new concept of what societal norms are, right? And then I think beyond that as well, it brings this very diverse perspective to the playing field. It's a proven fact that females think extremely differently from males as well. And I guess there's also this idea of they have a very artistic way of viewing things. And so you'll see a lot of girls in science fields, but focusing on the modeling aspects and designing very compatible devices to do everyday activities as well. But then you'll also see girls like coding and building apps from scratch. And I think those are both like incredible sides to things because by not involving women, if I put it this way, it just sounds really stupid because by not involving women, we're basically stopping innovation and limiting it to its fullest potential. By involving women, we're allowing it to go above and beyond what we ever truly thought could happen. Because if you think about it this way, what if we involved a woman in the building of the light bulb, right? Maybe it would have been done earlier, right? Maybe the shape of it would have been manufactured earlier as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are all these things that will always be up in the air and unknown just because we didn't recognize women in STEM as an ideal part of life during that time. But now we're slowly seeing these opportunities to open up and grow. We're seeing more Fortune 500 women CEOs out there. We're seeing more who have technical expertise, and they're being offered these opportunities to think bigger and solve bigger problems.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Wow. It reminds me of something Frederick Douglass said when they were debating whether or not women should have the right to vote in America. And he said, by denying women the right to vote, you are denying one half of the moral and intellectual power of the world to participate in government. So incredible.
You say it so simply, and I think you're not giving enough credit to yourself in some ways because you know, I see a problem and I'm trying to fix it.
Yeah.
But I see a person that has to be so connected with and take such ownership in the injustices in the world that you can't help but to do something about it and to pour your energy into it. And I think really that's why apathy is one of the worst things for the planet.
Yeah.
But this sense of connection is what is going to help us solve these problems. If you could tell us, how did you even find out about the Flint crisis at that age?
So my parents like to turn on the news every time we eat dinner, and we try and have like family dinners just every night. And so there's always the news going on in the background, but something that caught all of our ears was the Flint water crisis, almost because it seemed so unreal, right? This concept of water, while it was quite literally at our dinner table, that we were able to drink every single day, we were able to pour from the tap without even thinking about it twice, was something that so many, specifically kids in Flint, Michigan, didn't have the right to drink. And water is a basic right that everyone should have access to. So it felt so unfair that I had clean water to drink and no one else did. And I think it was those problems that quite literally keep me up at night that I decided that, okay, I have to do something about this, right? There's no way that I can that this can be happening to so many kids everywhere. And so I spent some time looking at what solutions already existed and kind of the failed laws that have been put into place. And so from there, I decided that I wanted to come up with some sort of scientific solution that could not only help Flint, but then I soon started researching and realized how many places across the world lead contamination does happen. So I wanted to create some sort of community solution that was able to help everyone around me just by watching the news. And honestly, that's where a lot of my problems, or not my problems, the problems I want to solve kind of gets drawn from.
Tell us then about cyberbullying. Tell us about Kindly. And have you been bullied? What did that look like? How did that begin?
So, bullying and cyberbullying by itself has been a widespread problem, bullying more than cyberbullying, just because of the advent of social media and things like that. But I think what the biggest thing that people weren't realizing was that there was no real cause to it. There was no real motive behind bullying other than wanting to assert dominance over someone else, right? And so in elementary school, I was tossed around a lot, bullied a lot, called different names, and I moved a lot. I moved to 7 different schools in the past, 12 years of my schooling life now. And every new place I went was this new period of adjustment where I had to deal with being called the new kid and, pushed aside. And I kind of had to learn how to work my way around it. And it got to this point where even standing up for myself didn't work, right? Because standing up for myself would just push me back down by the end of it. I would get bullied for standing up for myself. And so I wanted to come up with some sort of solution that was able to kind of attack the net problem, or the initial motive of what bullying is. And so I wanted to come up with a solution that didn't censor out words or block out something that was inappropriate, but instead gave the bully a learning experience. And that's essentially what Kindly was built off of. Now, my connection from bullying to cyberbullying was actually pretty rough as well, because as the entrance of social media started to slowly become a thing and everyone was getting onto it, I hesitated for a really long time. But as soon as I started, wanting to get my ideas out there and putting my platform out there as well, that's when I started joining social media, and things there are inevitable, right? You get death threats, you get people telling you to stop doing what you're doing, you get people telling you something as stupid and simple as you're too pretty to be doing science, right? And so, a lot of these really unnecessary comments, and ones that I guess initially I took to heart, were ones that I realized were just people trying to assert dominance with no real motive once again. And so wanting to do that, that's where Kindly was kind of built off of, this idea of a non-punitive approach towards bullying. So it's a service that can be integrated into a lot of different front ends. I'm actually in progress with looking at organizations like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, looking at how we can turn on and off the cyberbullying filter. And if you think about it, it's like a spell check for cyberbullying. Nobody wants to send an email with a bunch of grammar mistakes in it. And similarly, nobody wants to send a text or, I guess, and even an email with specific insults or aggressive behavior in it as well. So it's almost like this double checking mechanism in which before you send it, it's able to say, hey, we detected 3 or 4 instances of cyberbullying in this email. Would you like to change this? You can choose yes, you can choose no. And that's it. That's the entire thing, because I recently read an article that says it only takes 7 seconds for a teenager to want to unsend something that they sent that might potentially be offensive. And so that was kind of the mission behind Kindly. And even beyond that, I wanted to develop some sort of artificial intelligence tool that was able to kind of keep up with society around us. So Kindly is actually a machine learning algorithm, and anyone can contribute to it off the landing page, where you respond to a bunch of prompts with the way you would respond to it and train the algorithm so that everyone can be a part of the solution.
I know in one of your TEDx talks, you talked about the importance of everybody committing to helping their fellow citizens. And it seemed to me, that encouragement of all of us to kind of take ownership and to be a lead protagonist in making the world a better place really, kind of is at the core of framing this idea that the world is really fundamentally one country and all of us are citizens of the planet. We're all global citizens, right? I'm curious, do you view yourself as part of this kind of rising generation of young people who is really taking this idea of being a global citizen to heart?
Yes, I absolutely consider myself a world citizen. And I think that's another big part of it is like sometimes we're so centered around where we live in our own personal community that sometimes we lose touch of the bigger community. And like honestly, we're all on the same planet. We're all living to make the world a better place. And I think that's why COVID brought up such an uproar as well, because at that point we all wanted one thing. We all wanted it to be over, and we all wanted everyone to be safe and everyone to be happy and everyone to actually like be able to exit their houses once again. And so it was almost like it was almost nice to see everyone coming together for a main goal, regardless of how how many people's lives are lost in the process. But I think it would be interesting to see that happen again. Not COVID, but just this idea of everyone wanting one specific thing out of the world.
Gitanjali, I have been trying to invent little things in my room since I was 6 or 7 years old. I would have loved to have had your book, which is called A Young Inventor's Guide to STEM. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey and process of invention?
So I have this very, I guess, intact 5-step process of innovation that I like to share with kids, and it's observe, brainstorm, research, build, and communicate. And I always like to say, if you can reduce innovation down to 5 steps, you can do anything, right? And I guess there's a 6 secret step, which is essentially iteration. But the way I like to kind of think of how you can analytically come up with ideas is as simple as observing the environment around you, brainstorming ideas, or coming up with a list of them, reducing them to one or two by researching everything else and recognizing that it's not viable, and then building whatever ideas that you have in front of you and then telling people about it. And that's literally all innovation is breaking these down into 5 different steps. But you can do it as many times as you want, right? I quite literally a visual that shows the 5 steps of innovation with a line connected through it. And then when I click the next slide, there's a bunch of different arrows everywhere. And I always tell these students that don't memorize the arrows, right? Because that defeats the whole purpose. Is the whole point of innovation is this is just a network of ideas that you can start to circulate around each other. Go through these 5 steps in whichever order you want, right? If you want to build something for starters, then go for that, right? If you want to start by telling people about an idea before you've even built it, you can do that as well, right? There's always a way around innovation, but it's always centered around this idea of coming up with ideas and coming up with solutions to these ideas that you see and then narrowing it down. Because that truly is the heart of innovation out there. And I guess trial and error is always a big part of when it comes to innovation and messing around with innovation. How I like to view, I guess, failure and messing up in that process is just going to another step of the process and trying something else, right? There's never there's no like strategic prescriptive way to do anything in innovation. And mostly you shouldn't set yourself any hard deadlines for coming up with innovations, because that's where most of the failure comes from, is these deadlines that you're setting for yourself. But innovation can't work on a deadline. Creativity can't work on a deadline. You have to take that time to think bigger over a long period of time. And when you have no motivation, you have no motivation. When you have more motivation, work harder during that time. I've had ideas that have taken me up to 3 months to build and ideas that have taken me up to 3 years and anywhere in between, right? There's really no time limit. There's no risk that's not worth taking. And there's nothing else really in the mix. I think it's very interesting to see how the world has grown to this idea that, almost coming up with like these small kits and the latest technology out there that people can quite literally build within their own home, and even increasingly accessibility to labs, right, for high schoolers, and recognizing their potential in the field as well. And I think what that brings is, I guess, a new diverse perspective, right? We talked about males, we talked about females, but now also kids and Gen Z and what they bring to the playing field. I always say that I always think kids come up with better ideas than adults because they're not restricted with the box around their head, right? They're taking risks and they're coming up with big ideas when they have nothing to lose. There's no job to lose. There's no, family. There's no kids. It's school, right? And you can mess up as many times as you want because there quite literally is nothing to lose. Like, for example, for me, I was running all sorts of lead chloride experiments in my backyard. And the most that I got was yelled at by my mother for trying to bring toxic chemicals into the household. However, I had nothing to lose. The house is intact. My backyard is intact.
Yeah.
I melted a little bit at the table, but that's okay. Doesn't matter.
What are your hopes and your vision, not only in terms of how you use your own practice and your own engagement with science and also playing the piano if you continue to do that, But what is your hope and your vision for the planet as a whole and us as a human family as a whole? What do you hope? What do you wish for us collectively?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a hard one. I guess the biggest thing is, I think for starters, I always used to tell every student that I worked with that science is kind of this tool that they could wield to solve global problems. Science is their superpower. And I kind of stand by that every day, right? It's this idea of, you know, you see a problem in society and you don't have to wait around for someone to do it. And once we make that the norm, everyone will be willing to solve problems. So through my innovation workshops, I've worked with about 68,000 students across 43 countries. And the biggest thing that I've learned from each and every single one of them is everyone has a potential to innovate and everyone has a potential to come up with big ideas out there. I think from there, what I realized is everyone just needs their passion to be, supported, and everyone needs to grow as an innovator. So I guess my biggest hopes and dreams for the future is that every kid out there, every student out there, every, I guess, potential Gitanjali out there is able to get that support, is able to learn from their mistakes, and is able to grow as an innovator, whether that be in the field of science or art or music or history or anything that they're passionate about, right? Because there shouldn't be anything stopping them. There shouldn't be backlash from the environment around them. There shouldn't be anyone in social media telling them that they can't do what they're doing, right? I hope everyone, every other kid out there kind of is able to follow their dreams without any consequences in the way, without having to worry about what other people say.
I've got to say that, you're talking about every kid being their own superhero. You certainly are one of ours.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for your time.